Welcome to Beyond the Box. I'm Jose Gutierrez Jr. Have a very beautiful special guest and a member of the music community, the academic community, her community, wherever she sets her foot. We have Professor Carmen Hoover here, and just giving you a proper introduction. Let me go over a little bit about Professor Hoover. Carmen Hoover holds degrees in political science and writing with a master's in fine arts from the University of Montana. Originally from South Dakota and currently living in the Pacific Northwest. She's taught at Olympic College, Northwest Indian College, and in the Native Pathways program at the Evergreen State College in Olympia. Hoover was the longtime literary editor of the Missoula Independent newspaper and has published essays and poems in journals such as Cut Bank, Hanging Loose, and Lit Rag. Her poems appeared throughout Leticia Nieto's book, Beyond Inclusion, Beyond Empowerment, a developmental strategy to liberate everyone. And with her voice and with her service, she's liberated many hundreds and thousands of people as an educator. Many students have come through her program, the rock and roll class, and it's rock and roll. Give me the proper title, Professor Hoover.
The history of rock and roll, music and ideas.
That's right. And a very popular class. When you have a chance to visit the Olympic College campus and visit her class or take that class, we recommend you do it. She's had many powerful artists come and visit, showing theory and practice together in the classroom. So we're very glad to have you on Beyond the Box, Professor Hoover. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Jose.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to just allow you to have a moment to share a little bit about your background. I see you're from the northern region of the country, the cold area, and spent time in South Dakota, Montana, Minnesota. Tell us a bit about you. What should we know beyond your professional accolades, which we just shared?
Yep, I grew up in South Dakota, which is a cold place, also a very hot place, depending on the time of year. And I spent my summers in Minnesota. I always lived with my grandma in the summers, and then eventually ended up going to the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, and that's how I ended up doing all the things that we're going to talk about today.
That's right. Now, what I did mention it at the very outset, but this is an exciting interview because you're part of a special project, which is a part of your legacy as an artist and a member in the community, the music community. You're part of Brown Mark's new book, My Life in the Purple Kingdom, and you have a special role. It's not. We talked about this during the pre-meetings, and not necessarily a title, but an extraordinary description of your role in this book is the person who helped Brown Mark reclaim his voice, helping him reclaim his voice. Very powerful. What just can you add a little bit to that? Because we're going to get to the book a little later. But I mean, just what does that mean? Helping people reclaim their voice is something you said that's part of your role on Earth. It gives you fulfillment. Why and what does that mean?
Yeah, that's something that I really believe in. I teach that history of rock and roll class once a year. It's real exciting, as you know. I bring live musicians into the classroom towards the end of the quarter. Um, Most of the time, most quarters, I'm teaching writing, and I teach all levels of composition. You know, the pre-college level through advanced comp and argumentation. Um, and so, this idea that many people experience in schooling, education, oftentimes people have felt that they don't really have a voice when they're writing for school, that they're made to fit into some type of box or sound a certain way to meet expectations of other people. And those are important tools. But I really believe in self-expression, right? And encouraging people to sound like themselves and be themselves and not try to sound like someone they're not. So that's my day job, right? Day to day, all year.
Right.
Um, and so when this issue came up that Mark was unhappy with the way that the voice was unfolding in this manuscript, which had been done over a long period of time. He's talked in interviews about starting that book, I believe, over 15 years ago, as sort of a therapeutic writing. And there were other writers involved and different things happening with different chunks of the manuscript, and it started to feel disjointed and not like himself. Okay. So that was the role that I came in to help with, was just to make sure that it was a voice that was true to him, that he could feel like he could read from the book at a reading and not feel false. Okay. That he would feel like it was just, still just another version of him, his real voice, which that's what writing is.
Right. Well,
or should be.
You mentioned something, pretty critical there, in that, writing is helping people with using your own voice. And sometimes people are kind of steered into how to craft their voice or what to write. And that kind of removes authenticity of one's voice, like not coaching how to use your voice, but what to write. And you playing an instrumental role, you do that not only as an educator, also as a friend, obviously, to Brown Mark, but then also with your own writing. And, how do you capture your own voice and release it to the world? Like, what are some of the methods, since we're on that, since you brought that up really quick? What inspires you to write, and what do you write? How would you describe it?
Well, it just depends on what's happening, right? So I've enjoyed writing my whole life, and really started, in that teenager way, getting kind of serious about writing as a teenager. And I've always felt pretty excited about learning different ways to express. So I'm not against any certain way of expressing, and if Mark had wanted to write a book that, the literati of New York, was going to ooh and ah over the soaring sentence structures and so forth, that would have been fine, right? But that it's just not the kind of book that he wanted to write. He wanted to sound like himself and talk to fans and other down-to-earth people, right? Right. So I feel lucky in my life that I've learned a lot of different ways of approaching communication, which is really all writing is, right? It's just a way to communicate. And so if you're not communicating, it's not working. Right. I was extremely, cripplingly shy as a young person. And my thought about how to cure myself of that so that I, wouldn't be eaten alive by the world. So I thought, well, I'll join the debate team when I get to high school, and that will cure me. And that experience, of course, it did make it so I could talk to other people without being afraid, even though I lost every round my first year, my freshman year. But luckily I had a really great coach, a transformative coach in my life, who never made me feel bad for dragging down the team points.
Who's this person?
Mr. Don Dobish. Was my coach. Just a fantastic person. And sort of a side benefit to that is nowadays they say if you're really competitive in debate, it's like earning a master's degree every year that you do the event. It's a very research intensive high school activity. And I've just really started to find my way around research. I would go to the college library with basically all of my free time in high school. Meanwhile, I was also, I grew up in a university town, and I was meeting poets and musicians and speakers, and B.B. King came and played in my town because it was, a university town. back in the 70s. So I just had a really rich experience as a child, especially having to do with communication, cross-cultural communication. And I had access to, things like a college library, which in rural South Dakota, that they're not everywhere, right? It's really lucky to grow up with a lot of great influences with writing and communication and knowledge building.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you to your teacher too. I wish he could have been present for some of these national and presidential debates that we've seen. These are pretty poor examples of debating method, right?
Oh, it bears no resemblance.
I was just thinking of my debate students, and I was like, this would be a demolition derby with our students. They would destroy. It's not really a debate, is it? The national presidential debate, the style.
No, not at all. It is. It's terrible. Last time around, I thought, well, they should at least they should have live fact checkers at the debate. But this year, that it just would have been too labor intensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. You're part of the Native Pathways program. You've been an instructor at Northwest Indian College, as I mentioned earlier. And also, of course, you're a full professor. You teach at Olympic College as well, 3 of the colleges. And a lot of your work, just your identity itself, is very near and dear to your heritage and ethnicity as an indigenous person. And yesterday was just the national holiday known as Columbus Day, and some of our states, municipalities, and regions have rechristened that day as Indigenous Peoples Day. What is the impact of that? What do you think? I know some regions totally don't recognize our Indigenous people at all, and they just stick with Columbus. Can you talk a bit about that?
Right. I think most don't. Right. That it's. I think it's still Columbus Day for most areas. Boy, it's really great to see it happen. I can't. I mean, I think my whole entire life, this is something that people have said. Right. Like, oh, they should switch that over to Indigenous Peoples Day. We didn't really say that back then. We probably would have said Indian Day or something like that. It's really great to see, and it is heartening to see it happen. It's even happened in South Dakota.
Oh yeah.
Right. Not necessarily the most progressive state.
And who are the peoples from South Dakota and the region? I know your people are from there too, but what are the tribes and nations, the major ones?
Yeah. So my background is Iowa, so actually not from what's now South Dakota, but more like a cousin.
Okay.
South Dakota I think it's around 11% Native. Multiple reservations there: Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota. And of course, the unceded Black Hills are in South Dakota as well. The longest running court case in America. The Lakota people could cash in and take billions of dollars in exchange for their treaty rights and have refused to do so.
Can you give us a brief intro to that so people can do the further digging?
Yeah, they could go back and look at the treaty from 1868, which is reaffirmed by the Supreme Court, I believe, in the 1980s. And there has been a fund and money on the table to stop that fight. And as you may know, there are areas of the Lakota Nation that are right up there at the top of the stack of poverty in the United States, and still prioritize culture and treaty rights over money. So I grew up in the, and I grew up in the American Indian movement days. Um, these ideas were very present in my life, always.
Thank you. Um, how do how do how does it come across? No, no, well, that's really cool. That first of all, there's a significant percentage. I can't believe I could even say that, but that's a significant percentage of indigenous people in any state in the country. I can't
Oh
believe I
yeah.
just am saying that at 11%, you know, and most of the Pacific Northwest has was not decimated by the military. There were wars, some wars and skirmishes, but most of this land has been treaty agreed upon, broken treaties, but agreed upon. And so they got to avoid the massacres, the straight up massacres and extinctions in some cases of groups further east and in the Caribbean. Um,
Though there were treaty wars here too.
yeah.
And even over here on the west side, the Yakima got involved, and the military, it wasn't a military presence like what we think of during removal in the 1830s, or the things that happened in the Upper Plains. But there were militias and violent families, and Governor Stevens um, not being particularly helpful to tribal peoples.
Yeah. And
It's everywhere. It's
yeah.
definitely, the whole. But yeah, 11% is uh, uh, enrolled natives are about 2% nationwide. So to be from a state that's 11%, um, you are steeped in culture in a different way, and it impacts. It's a different kind of racism too.
Yeah. Can you talk about that? The different kind of racism? Is
Well,
that what you described?
there's a lot of reservation land. There's a lot of border towns, and there is even to this day a lot of racial tension between natives and non-natives, mostly white people in South Dakota.
How does that play out? Like people, there's of course the groups that say like racism doesn't exist at all.
Mm.
Some people acknowledge it, but in certain pockets in our country and around the world, there's still a unique terrorism form of racism or horror. And I don't know that that's what you're describing, but I've seen it myself. And how would you describe it in South Dakota?
Well, it's a real mix, and probably, I don't. I'm kind of in the camp that I don't usually call individual people racist. I think we're all subject to the legacy that we share, right? Which is a legacy, among other things, filled with violence and genocide and trickery. And we all share that, and we all absorb stereotypical ideas. I don't think most people are racist in the sense that they're in the KKK and they think of themselves as racist. Though the KKK was pretty big in South Dakota for a while. They also hate Catholics, right? Um, so um, so you did kind of have a movement of the KKK in the Midwest as well.
Mm,
Um, but it's a mix. I would say a lot of it is just run of the mill racism, where a person slighting you would just think that they're colorblind or something like that. But there is also violence. I lost a friend in my 20s to um, a violent murder by a group of young white men.
mm,
Um, it's it's racism across the board, and of course, you know, if you may know from the news this year that tribes have been in conflict with the current governor of South Dakota.
mhm,
Is not a supporter of indigenous liberation.
mm. Well, join the bunch, Governor. This has
Yeah.
been the fight for 5 centuries. right now.
Yeah,
Right?
it's really a remarkable story.
What
Uh,
give us
the
another tidbit so they can go
just
further,
the
so the viewers
well,
can.
just the you know, Native peoples in this hemisphere have refused to give up. It's pretty inspiring. Columbus arrived not here, of course, but south of here
Mm-hmm.
a long time ago, and indigenous people have never given up um, the fight for culture and sovereignty, and probably never will.
Well, that's part of the beautiful, indomitable spirit. You know, reason. You know, certain groups. I think. I know. You know, my ancestors, not only in this continent, but the Zulus worship their ancestors. Only second to God. Only second to the Creator. And it means something to recall the fight over generations that people lived, so you could go further. And we're seeing some of that now. And I did want to clarify a remark, because I didn't want to insinuate that the horror and terrors did not impact the indigenous people this far west, because you know, I'm knowing intricately some of the knowledge of the Nisqually warriors and the great fight, the Wahilu, and you know, the people of the Duwamish, and you know, people stood and tried as
Yes.
best they could against technology and disease and other things. Here we are. And so I wanted to make sure I don't want people to think, you know, what is he talking about? You know, no, I know the Lummi people and, you know, many of the great tribes and nations who did what they could, getting word from the east of what was coming.
And it just was expressed differently everywhere. You know, California is so close to us, and yet they had a completely different and extremely horrific um, experience in California, that just because of the way that lawmakers were behaving, um, you know, settler colonialism was expressed in a particularly violent way there. It's different. It's different for different regions. You know, the states that were emerging. Um, hard on everybody. All this, you know, the stories are different. I think it's one of the reasons why it's hard for non-natives to get a grasp on Native history without falling into stereotypes. It really is a complicated and vast history. If you think, you know, over 600 tribal nations, it'd probably be a good project to try to get school kids to memorize that list, but that is not what we do, right?
No.
That most people have just heard of a few tribes. And each of those tribal nations has language, traditions, culture, their own ceremonies, their own ways of doing things, and all experienced genocide in unique ways.
Even I just find it critical even to point out the fact that a lot of the tribes and nations of this region, not just the region, the continent of North America, even the disputes they had, there were disputes, there was conflict, and it was worked differently than what was to come. Like when their conflicts and disputes were exploited, it became it became something different than how they might have had a conflict before. It became just decimation, extinction campaigns, and that wasn't the tradition of you know, war. However gruesome or however horrible it might have been, it wasn't to eradicate a human being's whole lineage from the earth.
No.
I can't find that on record, and I've done research in all kind of indigenous communities around the world, and that was not the method or the outcome, the desired outcome of these conflicts. So I think that's
No,
important.
of course, all humans have violence. It's part of our nature, right?
Yeah.
But it's something it's something new that happened here when this flood of people um, began to come across a very different kind of mindset.
When we mentioned Columbus, and you mentioned it, you said it very briefly, but I just think it's important to remark that you know this merchant who was sent and found the wrong place, came upon the wrong land that he didn't expect to be at. He never touched North American continent. That was part of his history. You and I would not be here in the same capacity. I think it's important to find the triumph and the tragedy at the same time. We wouldn't be here. Most of the people we know would not be here in the same way,
Mm-mm.
and likely not at all. If not for this situation,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important to just know the value of even the most horrible incidents, the mistakes, the intentional
Mm-hmm.
disasters, things that were done in wicked ways. Um, but I find it also fascinating that he's so celebrated, you know,
Mm-hmm.
by people who he didn't represent at all, had no care to represent. He came, as part of a merchant from the Spanish crown,
Right.
and we hold him up like he was a U.S. Somehow U.S. representative. He never touched foot on the continent. I just think that's important to remark because I think people think he did come to the United States to go to Florida or something, and he didn't.
No, but every culture needs a story, and
Mm,
American culture, has the disadvantage of not having a a deep story here.
mm,
It's a brand new story. Um, and so I understand that impulse to need to have a unifying story to have it all make sense without having to get into the details too much. When I was in grade school, Columbus Day was just we celebrated that at school,
yeah.
and we did talk about a genocide, but it was the Jewish genocide.
Mm-hmm.
We really in school and when I was a kid didn't really talk about the genocide that had happened on the very land where our school was built. And that could probably be said of, every school,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because it was all indigenous land not that long ago in big picture historical terms, just a minute ago. Same for universities,
Right.
right?
Washington
Um,
State University, my alma
they're in the
mater.
land grant
That's
schools
right.
are, those are expressly built on recently seized lands that the government then gifted
Right.
to build the land grant schools.
Right.
Yeah, it's a mess. And yet, as you say, that we're all here together now. And, you know, throughout my life, I've also benefited from, knowing the many amazing people who wouldn't have been here without settler colonialism. I don't think that that's enough, right? Our enjoyment of life and our pleasure in life, and the people we know, and the music that we listen to, um, and there's still unfinished business that has to be um, continued when it comes to Native peoples here.
Well, I totally, this is called Beyond the Box. So we don't, like Professor PLO Lumumba in Africa, he says, some people want us to think inside the box. Some people say think outside the box. He said the key is to think without the box. And, I just feel that's his key. And I agree.
Mm-hmm.
And, I just feel like if justice won't come by the hands of humanity, nature will deliver it. And maybe that won't come
I
at the
think that might be happening right now.
I think it's very possible, and I totally
Mm-hmm.
welcome it with all the tragedy and terror that may come with it. It's not something that's desired, but if we won't correct these things, the
Yeah,
earth will do it, I
yeah.
believe. And I think maybe
Uh,
before, sometime before, maybe thousands of years ago, but, who knows?
mhm. Well, the Earth doesn't need humans to
No,
survive.
It doesn't.
Um,
Definitely not.
yeah, and of course, I hope the best for everybody, and always am an advocate of public policy that keeps people safe and equal. But it is um, we are living through a pretty big event, and it does at times feel like it's nature letting us know that we have gone too far.
How are you? We just gloss over like we're not living in the middle of a historic moment in Earth's history in the last century, at least. It's
Yeah.
COVID time. How are you holding up? Your teaching still? Is it mostly through this technology we're using right now? And
Yeah, it's all online. It's really not the same gig at all.
how's that feel?
Oh, it's you know, it, this I still love working with students, but it's such a mediated thing now. I was an active resistor of technology on practically moral grounds
Yeah,
until last March.
yeah.
I've always resisted online and
Mm,
very very hands-on type of teacher in the classroom. For instance, I've never been a lecturer. Like I kind of start fake lectures on the board, but the real goal has always been to get the conversation going. So I do have an agenda and a lecture, but I've never ever in my life just talked in front of a class, right? I talk for a couple minutes, try to provoke some questions. That's when people ask, they hear the answer in a different way than if you just stood up there and talked, right?
right.
And so now I'm in a situation where you just almost have to lecture.
Oh,
hmm
right.
Plus everything's in writing. So everything I would have done for 20 hours a week in conversation with students in a space, now I have to type it out and spell check it and get it uploaded with the right buttons. And I'm definitely feeling my age. I will tell you that. I never wanted to learn any more technology in my life, and now that's all I do. Um, right, is
Well,
teach through these other uh, online learning platforms and Zoom. It's a it's a it's not easy on anybody, and it's hard for students too. It's very isolating. And my experience of education before this is that education is the opposite of isolating, right? You're meeting new people and forming different kinds of relationships and learning about the world from each other. And I'm used to teaching in pretty diverse classrooms, and um, there's a flattening effect I think that's happening to education. And I just hope that you know historically pandemics don't last forever. um, I hope
hope
we can
not.
come out of this with some sense about education. um, Online ed, the reason I've been opposed to it throughout my career is that it's just I have perceived it as um, sort of a B class education that's, has been reserved primarily for poor people,
Hmm.
right? Rich people have never had their kids sit at home in front of a computer to learn, right? Not the kids going to Harvard.
Right.
That's not part of their experience. That online ed has been something that was less than. Now it's for everybody. It's real interesting to see
Mm,
that kind of equalization happen.
hmm.
But it is also kind of a flattening. You just don't get the same kinds of bonds. We're social creatures, so it's hard. It's a sacrifice for everyone. I also think it's one of the best times possible to be in college, right? That the people who are pursuing a college education right now, when this pandemic resolves, um, the students who have been slogging away in the most difficult of circumstances are going to be ready to roll right out of the gate when whatever happens next happens, right? It's a
Yeah.
really savvy time to be in school, but it's a lot more work, and it's harder for students, and it's more lonely.
I wonder what you think about. I've heard this from many people in educational circles at all levels. that some people fear and some people anticipate that this will be the new adjustment of what
This is,
education will become. And of
yeah.
course, it'll cut costs when this
Oh,
opens
yeah.
back up.
Yeah.
It'll reduce some brick and mortar costs and other kind of costs that we don't have time to get into right now. But what do you think?
Oh, yeah. That's always been a concern of mine. And I think it's going to be a real concern now. It is cheaper. It is cheaper to do it online. Um, it's not just cheaper, there's also a flow of money that's going from less and less tax dollars, but still tax dollars that's, now flowing to private industry like Zoom.
Mm.
No criticism of Zoom, it's not like they exploited this situation. They already existed, and that's been so helpful. I don't know what we'd do without Zoom right now. But I sincerely hope that we don't stick to this plan just because it's cost effective. Um, I hope that young people will really insist on what they deserve, which is a person to person, expensive education that really invests in the future, not just of the United States, but of humanity. I think we're really seeing the consequences of just a lack of critical thinking and a lack of an ability to access good information. People who can't do those things are very, very vulnerable to nefarious messaging.
Mm.
Education is essential, and I think that any kind of culture acknowledges that normally. um, I mean, obviously, Indigenous people globally value education from time immemorial, right? Passing on what you need to know, who you need to know, where you belong in the universe, what your place is. And even Thomas Jefferson said, you have to have an educated populace to have a democracy.
That's right.
Um, we're, education feels devalued right now, but it's not because of the pandemic. That's been coming for a while.
Yeah.
Um,
Go ahead.
the tax money has been reducing for a while. When I was in college
Mhm.
in Minneapolis in the early 80s, I think my Pell Grant paid for about 80% of my total costs, right? And I could work a summer job and have enough money to buy books and pay the other 20% throughout the year. A completely different era. Um, I'm really going on about education now, but also when I was, in my lucky era of education, nobody tried to put me on a path or make me stick to something in college. I could switch majors anytime I wanted. And I was definitely on the 6-year track to graduate college. And
I, not
um,
a rush. You weren't rushed to do it either, were
I
you?
loved school. I was a political science major during the Reagan era, you
Mm.
know.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't think I ever really did a full-time load. I mean, I can't remember numbers and things. Um, but I think I probably always did like the bare minimal full-time load because I also had a very busy life going out and seeing bands and plays and doing stuff. I was a South Dakota girl in the big city. I really wanted to experience culture and city life, and um, always I loved school, but I loved a lot of other things too when I was young. And um, I feel for young people now who are not having that experience.
The sister of Segway. She introduces the art scene now. Now we could go on, and I would love to actually.
Oh,
'Cause-
I could
no,
talk to you
no,
all day, Jose.
I know that with the education part, I had so many questions. I was thinking of will this balance out the performance of our students, all the discrepancies and uh, different levels of performance that we note with children, different economic and racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. I wonder how this will display, you know, the results of our student performances. If this will equalize it or.
Well,
exacerbate.
in a way, you can see how it's an equalizer, like in the sense that everyone's in the same such a situation, and everyone, well, I mean, probably not everyone now. I think wealthy people have organized themselves into pods and hired educators, right, to help their collected children. Um, it does have an equalizing effect, I think, in the sense that everybody's experiencing it, but it's I believe going to exaggerate the problems that were already there. Not everybody has internet access. Not everybody has a good working computer, much less the two or three or four or five computers that you would need to have, a couple of adults working from home and a couple of kids, and just the load on your Wi-Fi, and not everybody has college educated parents that can guide them through um, homework. It's very rough, and this is just the intellectual part. There's also kids who are not getting fed on a regular basis because they're I mean, the wealth gap in the United States is absurd, right? It's like it's almost like a developing country as far as our wealth gap. So there's kids who aren't being fed, and of course, kids who are experiencing abuse now.
You still there? Okay. Well, we may have a little technical difficulty. So while I'm still here, I don't know if you can see me, if you can hear me. This is again Jose Gutierrez. I'm with Professor Carmen Hoover, and we are talking about right now the state of education, how she's experiencing education as an instructor, and how we anticipate our children and students are experiencing education. Um, she's been an advisor as far as a feature in today's interview, advisor on the book by Brown Mark, who was part of Purple Rain and the Revolution Princess Band. Um, his new book is called My Life in the Purple Kingdom. And so hopefully we'll be back with Professor Hoover in just a moment. One of the interesting things we talked about is Indigenous Peoples Day and the importance of that. That some states, municipalities have identified what was once Christopher Columbus Day as now um, Indigenous Peoples Day. And what's the relevance of that? Why is that important in this state that we're living in right now at this moment? So hopefully we'll be rejoined by Professor Hoover. And if not, we will come back and continue the interview. So stand by. Thank you. All right, and we're back. A brief intermission. Nature does what it wants to do. We've been having technological and electrical issues here in the region with the weather. We welcome our rain back, and part of the consequences sometimes it gets a little rambunctious. So
Yeah, just a little power outage here and there. They're pretty fast though at getting us back online.
that was nice, huh?
Yeah, that was good.
You have the cities around the world that have anticipated outages every day. I mean, have you heard of these places? Like, yeah, we about 11 o'clock at night, all electricity goes out and it'll be back on at 2 a.m. I'm like, gosh, we should be very thankful.
Yeah.
So I wanted to transition. We were going very deep, and we could have a whole lecture series on every subject we've talked about so far. But one of our really anticipated feature points of today's talk was, of course, Brown Mark's book, Brown Mark of Prince and the Revolution, his book, My Life in the Purple Kingdom. And I want to get to that as we get to the end of the interview. But what we didn't mention is your adventures, not only going through being a college student, you've been a national servant in the military, and you transitioned out of that and right into the world of the Minnesota music scene, Minneapolis, and your life in that. Just give us an introduction so we can sprout from there and go into the interesting details of your life on the Purple Rain tour and your role, and what was that like?
Well, moving to Minneapolis was a real lucky break, and I didn't ever think about going to college anyplace else. You know, I wasn't a kid that was encouraged to, apply at a lot of places or anything like that. In fact, the year I graduated high school was actually the first year that Yale admitted women. You know, all through high school, Yale wasn't a place that girls, if you can imagine this, that girls could apply.
Wow.
It's a very different era in that way. And when I moved to Minneapolis, I already had a Prince record, one, and then 6 months later, after I moved there, something like that, Dirty Mind came out, which is still possibly my favorite Prince album on most days, most of the time. But it wasn't an era where you could, it wasn't like Prince was playing a lot. And that I still got really interested in the music scene, right? Probably the person I saw the most was Sue Ann Carwell. Her voice, just amazing. Always had a good band. My friends and I would traipse all around Minneapolis, St. Paul, and see her in all kinds of places. That's probably who I saw the most. And sometimes Prince would be there too, taking in the show, right?
Okay.
Just a really happy time to be alive. I was in school. I loved school. I always had fun things to do. I had great friends. Eventually I got a job at First Avenue. I was the ashtray girl. That was my job. Because you still smoke inside then, another unbelievable thing.
This is the legendary First Avenue.
Yeah.
From
And
the
it
film.
had,
Okay.
yeah, it had just recently transitioned over from, it had been at a couple different clubs throughout the 70s, but First Avenue was a new local management. It had been kind of part of a chain before.
What does the ashtray girl do before you go further?
Oh,
what
you walk around and wipe out empty ashtrays into your ash can.
Okay.
And have a wet, stinky rag and wipe out the ashtrays for people. That was my whole job. I just did that all evening, every night that I worked.
Nice.
And then eventually I also, I was in the Army Reserves at this time, and pretty confident young lady. Had worked my way into other jobs pretty quickly. I was cashier and coat check girl. And being a cashier, you're working right at the front with, all the doormen, what we called bouncers. Waiters and waitresses were not called that either. They were called waitrons.
Right.
And I started to really notice that I felt like I could do a better job doing security, because there would be fights at the door, and, things would come to blows where I would think to myself, that's ridiculous. That could have just been worked out with words. So eventually another woman and I, my good friend Nance Jane, and I, through some controversy, worked our way into floor security and then door security jobs at First Avenue, which also, by the way, paid literally twice as much as a cashier job. And so we were working along with our doorman jobs, and the Purple Rain filming thing came up. And so in August of '83, that was when, the famous night where Purple Rain, the song, was debuted, and that was Wendy Malvoin's first night with the band in public as well. And then shortly after that, we got the announcement that the club was going to close for the filming. And we got picked on that first round of jobs. So I worked security for the Purple Rain film set that was at First Ave. Nice. And then my longtime boyfriend at the time was also a security guy. And, so we had kind of gone through the same path together. And then he got hired on to be a bodyguard for the band, for the tour, for the Purple Rain tour.
Are you visible in any scenes from the film? Like, is there like nothing at all?
No, not at all. Strictly worked security, which provided a lot of interesting experiences, but no, not at all. I do have a cousin who's very visible in that scene where
Apollonia?
No, my cousin.
Oh, I know. I was hoping it was.
So just a nice girl, my cousin. When you're looking up at the balcony, there's a
Yeah.
scene like that with girls dancing up there, and my cousin is like the really tall, slender girl with long black hair dancing up there.
Okay.
You know, and of course, I have friends and co-workers who did have moments in the film, but I never did any of that.
Okay.
But once my boyfriend got the job on Purple Rain Tour, I didn't have a role on Purple Rain Tour. I was just a hanger-on, just hanging around with my boyfriend whenever I could. I would fly out for a week or two. Yeah, I was just hanging around on the tour, and I knew many of the people on tour from First Avenue, of course, and just that whole social scene. But I dropped out of college, right, to do it. So I was on track to graduate in 6 years, and then it took me about another 8 years before I went back to school. I didn't finish my college degree until I was in my early 30s. If my daughter did something like that, I would be so mad. But you know, it's not a thing that I can look back and regret at all. Anyways,
Well, you traveled.
Yeah.
You were part of the national Purple Rain Tour,
yeah. Sometimes we would, you know, when it was a big jump from one area to another, we would drive a Prince van to wherever the bands needed to go, and you know, while the band would fly. So I also did some pretty crazy overnight driving from one region to another.
Yeah.
That was the first time I had been out here. I had trained at Fort Lewis, so I've been to this region before. But when I came out to Seattle when Prince played at the Tacoma Dome, and then we drove a Prince van down to the California shows, which were just giant. I don't remember how many, you know, there were like 5 or 6 nights in LA and another 5 or 6 nights in San Francisco, something like that. Like just these massive, it was a big deal. The Purple Rain Tour, it felt like the center of the universe, you know?
It wasn't it, for about a year or so? Seemed like it,
right? That's how it seemed. And you know, we had been pulling for this, the old time fans. Like I remember just, you know, our silly conversations back in the day, like, oh, if only the world heard Prince's music, he'd be a big star, you know? And and it was like our dream come true, right? That suddenly he was this global star, and way back, you know, this is before the internet or anything. Right. And so even though they were so famous and it was such a big deal, kind of how I got to know the band was that my boyfriend at the time was their bodyguard and driver. So there was a whole setup after every, you know, at the end of the night to get to the van, and they would let me ride in the band van because that's just how down to earth they were. The members of the Revolution are just sweet, genuine people. And so, you know, that's originally how I got to know Mark a little bit. And, you know, we didn't stay in touch or anything like that. And of course, you know, the Revolution disbanded in 86. But after Prince died, a lot of people reconnected, which I think just happened universally, right? That Prince fans reconnected. And of course, people from back then, that scene did as well. And coincidentally, we had just, maybe the year before, had set up a successful Facebook group for former First Avenue employees. So there was a little bit of connection happening already, you know, that probably just wouldn't have happened without the internet. And so just reconnecting, of course, people started talking about, you know, the possibility of writing books, and some people came out with books very quickly after Prince passed. And it was just one of those conversations that led to my work on Brown Mark's book.
So helping Brown Mark reclaim his voice.
Yeah.
I've got to go through some of his book. A very powerful heartbreaking, passionate accounts of his life. Talk about helping Brown. I know you now. Let me just say this for people viewing this. I know you're so humble. You would reduce yourself and your role as much as you could, but just share. What was kind of your role, and this is something you also part of your life's purpose is you find joy in helping people reclaim their voice. So take that joy real quick and talk a bit about um, how you helped Brown Mark reclaim his voice. 'Cause I know you said people were trying to write for him and it wasn't his authentic voice. But talk about your role in helping him.
Yeah, he'd reached out for other. I mean, he's not a writer, right? He's a musician and a producer and a songwriter. And he's talked about that it was therapeutic at the beginning. Some of the things that he was writing, it was done over a long period of time in different chunks with different people weighing in on how to put a book together. And I think he had just sort of felt like he'd lost track of it, and it wasn't speaking for him. And I mean, Brown Mark he's a humble, good person. He's not trying to be something that he's not, right? And he just wanted to tell his story and speak to fans and other people who were around then, or young people that would want to know what his life was like. He wasn't trying to write anything fancied up, right? He didn't want too much imposed on it. He just wanted to tell his story. And he'd received a lot of different kinds of advice with that. So by the time I came in, I just came in to harmonize things and make sure that, the words were words that he was comfortable with, that he felt like he had some alternate spellings that he wanted to use, which I'm all for alternate spellings and making up words as long as you're consistent, So I think, my role was just to harmonize and encourage and to say, yeah, you can spell cool with a K as long as you do it all the way through the book. That's right. Fine. Who's going to question you? You're Brown Mark, right? It's not a paper for college where you have to have standard written English or you get a bad grade. It's a cultural expression of your life that is going to be around forever, right? That his story, I'm so happy that landed with University of Minnesota Press, because it will be part of, the Minnesota legacy now, forever. So it was a lot of sticky notes. It was lots and lots of sticky notes. And I'm, as I was saying, I'm just not a computer person, right? I mean, I've been on email for a while, but, I didn't have a computer till I was 38 years old. Do you know what I mean? It's not part of my
Wait a minute. You bought a computer a month ago?
It's 2 months ago. Yeah.
2 months ago? Okay.
Yeah. So the way that I work best, I'm kind of a hands-on person too. I printed out the manuscript right away, started to, I'll do color-coded sticky notes. Just started to ask questions and think about how things were being expressed, how timelines were matching up, things like that. And then when we got a chance, the times that we got a chance to meet, he was hardcore. We would sit for hours, going through one sticky note at a time. Figuring out what he wanted to say and how he wanted to say it.
Very detailed process, it sounds like. And you made it, I'm gathering like a soothing effect that you had. I don't know how you would describe it, but it sounds like, you made it comfortable. And writing a book, writing a paper is difficult for people sometimes to process and organize. And that's just, wow. I'll thank you for
writing a book. That's hard. I mean, if it were easy, everybody would do it. Lots of people muse about writing a book sometime in their lives, and very few actually produce a book-length manuscript. And Mark did that. He wrote a book, right? It was an existing manuscript when I came in. He just needed it to harmonize with what he felt like was his true expressive self.
Do you have anything forthcoming as a writer? Like maybe something you're going to publish?
Now, I'll tell you what I've been really working on. I've been taking this opportunity where I'm stuck at home, typing everything and making documents about everything that I would normally just do live in a classroom. I am collecting up some writings about teaching. I mean, I hope that I will go back to a classroom, but at my age, I also have to grapple with the thought that I might have had my last day in a classroom, right? So I am trying to collect up the things that that I feel that have been most successful about my pedagogy in a live classroom. I am not a person who can comment really on online education. I'm doing my best. I'm learning a lot every day about how to do that. But what I am trying to capture is that person-to-person magic that can happen in a classroom with any kind of willing student. You know, one thing about most of the places that I've taught is that a large percentage of the student population will be unprepared for academic work. And I love that. I love working with populations who need a way in to that conversation. I taught it, you know, in Missoula, you know, when I was in grad school, I was a TA. I taught a section of comp every semester, or I worked in the writing lab, you know, and it's a different student population. People who, you know, test in to a university typically are just better prepared.
Right. Well, I feel I mean, it seems like it's a daunting excitedness to you're back learning again. You know, I guess this process of teaching, since you've been a teacher your whole life, you know, a teacher and student your whole life, and now you're back in a student mode.
Yeah, and method. And it's like I'm teaching the classes, but I've never been in a classroom. You know, when the first time I was a new teacher, I had my whole history of whatever 12 plus 6 is, you know, of education to draw on that experience of being on the student side of it, you know, so many years of it. And now, you know, I have no idea what it's like to be a student sitting in your living room trying to figure out every different teacher's way of putting together a Canvas page. I don't have that I don't have the life experience, right? So I do feel like I'm a new teacher again, and I'm having to prepare like I did in 1995. You know, you're revealing all of this. No one would have guessed it if you hadn't said it, because you're so smooth with everything you're sharing, and you know, we appreciate your body of knowledge you bring as an instructor, and your real life experience. I didn't even ask yet a couple questions. One, do you have any stories? Of course, the purple monsters and the purple people and everywhere who love Prince, they want to know, is there a story you want to share about Prince, your proximity to him or anything? Everybody loves the band, of course, and the revolution. Yeah. The whole. I mean, you know, my interactions with Prince were very minimal, and I've never tried to interact with him. I mean, I was at many bar shows where Prince was nearby, or maybe even really close to me, and I was always aware of him. And you know, was fascinated with him and inspired by him. For me, it was also political, right? I mean, the Dirty Mind album was, it wasn't just sort of punk new wave Minneapolis funk, which who would have ever thought, oh, there will be a whole new wave funk movement that will rule the world. It'll come out of Minneapolis. You know, it's just this insane story. So I don't have too many. I don't have too many interactions with him, though I've been around him hundreds and hundreds of times, you know. And there are things about him, I think that, you know, the maybe you know, people just looking back academically get wrong sometimes, you know, things like, oh, he would never look people in the eye, things like that. You know, that wasn't true. Every time he came into the club, actually, at first, he would wait in line at the club, just like anybody. He was already Prince, I think, all the way up to like 1982. He would stand in line and go through the door like a regular customer until the doorman started saying, oh, look, you're Prince. Maybe you should just, I think we created the VIP door because of him. Actually, I don't think we had a VIP door before, because there was no VIPs in Minneapolis, let me just say. And, you know, once in a while, you know, like maybe a Minnesota Viking would come down, or I remember the Chicago Bears once, you know, came out and about, you know, when they were in town for a game or something. But there were not VIPs and celebrities in Minneapolis at the time. I mean, later there were. Later, you know, after Purple Rain hit, First Avenue changed. Some would say not for the better, in the sense that it became this, you know, hub of for tourists and stuff. But also, you know, Madonna was down there with Prince. Janet Jackson came in with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. So I don't know, Prince was key, and he was obviously like the center of the creative part of it. But the rest of the scene was actually more fun, because like somebody like me wouldn't have been palling around with Prince, but I did pal around with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Those guys were a barrel of laughs, so fun. We went to the same happy hours. We'd stop on the street and talk. Jerome Benton was like my love counselor for a while. He would be the person I'd talk to about all my boyfriend problems. You know, he's such an optimistic person. You know, it's really more about the whole lifestyle. You know, the times that I talked to Prince were at work, and they were, you know, transactional conversations. But I was also a little afraid of him, you know, and especially once I started working at First Avenue, I didn't ever want to be, you know, I didn't want to ever get into a situation with Prince where he was mad at me or something where I could get fired from my job.
Sure.
I much more enjoyed the people around. Vanity was the sweetest. Vanity was just such a down-to-earth girl, especially just, I don't know, for how beautiful she was. And, you know, Vanity was like, she was so beautiful and so nice. It was kind of really more about that for me. My Prince stories, I feel, are more about me. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. You know, I had some crazy times, and you know, once we waited for overnight for tickets. We had, for the Controversy tour, my friends and I think we bought our tickets we got in the line a couple hours early and got pretty good tickets down at Dayton's downtown, but we were like in the 10th row. And my friends and I were like, this is not acceptable, right? So when he'd play at First Avenue a few times, and you know, there were occasions to see him in a small club, and that's kind of more what we liked and what we were used to. We were hardcore fans. So when the 1999 tour tickets went on, they were coming on sale. I think we went 12 hours before, and we went out to the place, out to the Met, feeling that we could maybe actually get first row if we were first in line there. So we stocked up, you know, we had our parka, is freezing cold. I don't remember the exact temperature, but well below zero, freezing cold.
Wow.
And so we, had our parkas and moon boots and all the gloves and whatnot that we could find. And then we had the web lawn chairs that you can stretch all the way out, like if you want to lay down in the sun, right? So we had those, sleeping bags, pillows, and we set all that up so we'd be first in line. And then we just waited in the car overnight, until somebody else came. We didn't know what it would be like, but we knew that we were going to have front row seats. And I think tickets went on sale at maybe like 7 or 8 a.m., something like that. And, we went out the evening before. And again, I can hardly even imagine a life without a cell phone and stuff. So there we were, just waiting in our car, running the heater off and on throughout the night, just talking. I think we did some homework probably, and then about 2 a.m, a friend of ours, he was a Minneapolis cop, and he was a friend of mine from the Army before, and he'd also worked at First Avenue briefly. So our arrangement was he would deliver chicken sandwiches from Burger King around 2, make sure we were still awake, because obviously we couldn't go to sleep or we might miss our chance, right? Yeah. So he brought us food, and then in exchange, he put in, and we got tickets for him and his girlfriend. So we were first in line. I think we only spent about 3 hours actually out on the lawn chairs in the freezing cold. It was hard. It was cold.
This is part of your new introduction to technology. You forgot to mention to viewers that this is before you could buy a ticket online. You had to wait.
Right. No, you had to
get your ticket
to go there
in advance, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, you could call on the phone, but it was like,
rotaries.
You had to dial all the numbers, and it was busy. You'd have to hang up, dial all the numbers again.
This was your guarantee to get the ticket you wanted, right?
You go to the venue, you wait in line there, you're first in line, and we were. So we had a block of, I think, 8 tickets, front row, right in front of Brown Mark. And, it was amazing. It was the kind of the way we wanted to experience their arena show. And we went overboard to make sure that happened. So for me, it's, it's more just about the life that I was living then, and my research life, Jose. Almost every day on my way home from school, I had to change buses downtown Minneapolis anyway. Mm-hmm. I would go to Schindler's on the 7th Street side of Block E. And Block E was like the Vice block of Minneapolis, and probably the only like legitimately scary block in the whole urban area. And it was kind of a sketchy block, like in a women's studies class. Our TA group, we went down to a porn shop and like talked to the workers in the dime peep shows in the back. Like, I can't even imagine taking a class into
This was research? Like this is part of research?
Well, that was for a class for school, which really just got me acclimated to Block E. Like, I realized, it's sketchy, but I can go down there too, And so I would go to Schindler's almost every day, and I had a friend who was on this tip with me, and we would just read magazines. There was no internet. We would just read magazines and newspapers for an hour or 2 a day. And the force of it was scanning for any kind of Prince-related anything, because we were always reading the tea leaves and piecing things together and finding out, where he was and when he was coming back to Minneapolis. And if there's somehow we were able to read the tea leaves to know, like, oh, I think there's going to be a secret show. Oh, it seems like there's going to be a party. And we would start to piece together this whole world. Now I know Alan Bloom was behind a lot of that, right? There was a media strategy in the early 80s. Of course, we weren't aware of that. And like, there were simple things like we didn't know his birthday. We were curious to find out his birthday. And I think this is like 1982 or 3. We still don't know when he was born. I think we had it narrowed down to June. But you couldn't just go on the internet and find out. There was no Wikipedia. Right. And he wasn't famous in the way that he would have been in any, a print encyclopedia or something like that. And we knew how to use the library. We're college girls, right? Right. So But we did know somebody who played basketball with his brother Dwayne in high school, and one of my friends went to high school with Prince. So I came home one day and there was a torn piece of notebook paper on the kitchen counter, and it said in, giant writing, June 6th. That's all it said. And it's like one of us, not me, but one of the other girls found out his birthday was June 6th. We were so excited, we have this secret knowledge. And turns out that's not his birthday at all. It's June 7th, right?
Next day, yeah.
Yeah, the next day. But it's just, we were close. Or whoever told us was, close. Game of telephone. It was just a different world and a different life, and a really important part of figuring out how to be, a person in this world.
Well, that is awesome. See, this is again another, we could continue. We will continue, and I think we could go into a whole nother sector. I did want to say, just allude to the book real quick. Can you hold the book up so people can see Brown Mark's book? This is a new book, University of Minnesota Press, Brown Mark's My Life in the Purple Kingdom. And we're here with Professor Hoover, of course, who Brown Mark credits her with helping him reclaim his voice. He was working on the book, as you said, before you had come on to help him, help motivate and help him redirect, and reclaim his voice. And he wasn't pleased with kind of where it was headed before you came on. So that's just a tremendous compliment, and always wonderful speaking with Professor Hoover anytime. I think I'm past my quota of speaking with you for 2020, and we get like 2 times we get to meet per year. And I think
twice is what we agree on. Well, it'll be January soon, and we'll start over.
We'll start January 1st. We'll be back. But let me ask you this. I wanted to just get people into the book. What's Brown Mark's, how does he feel about, of course, Prince rests in peace now, but how's his feeling? What was it like before Prince had gone, and now afterwards? Can you talk a little bit about that really quick?
Yeah, and I really would encourage people to read the book. It's really it is a good story. It was an honor to have any part in it. It was a real honor and a pleasure to work with Mark. And the pictures in it are pretty good too. The thing to me is that Mark is he's like any other person. He's like us, right? And as a kid, he had his struggles and he had his triumphs, and he was interested in music. He had false starts with it, but by the time he was, in his late teens, he was assertively playing music and had a band, and he was a lot like Prince, even though they didn't know each other yet. That there was this. Actually, I saw a talk by somebody who really credited part of this movement, just this explosion of young musicians. And if you think about it, it is pretty incredible, all the way from, Sue Ann Carwell and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and Andre Simone, Des Dickerson, Prince, of course, Cynthia Johnson. A lot of amazing music was coming up right in that generation. There was a very strong public school system with strong music programs that can be traced back to a person who made that happen and created policy for the Minneapolis school system that music was going to be a top priority. And then the Way Community Center, which Andre Simone's mom was instrumental in, provided instruments, and jazz musicians would come in and do mentorship things with young kids around music. Mark himself was able to get band, practice space at the Way, but there was this convergence of a new wave of music scene Even though I was joking about Minneapolis, not being expected to be like the funk center, there was a funk center before this, right? There was a very strong Black community in St. Paul that with musicians who toured and put out records and were really, really good. Until that neighborhood was decimated by I-94 going through, and city planners just destroyed that neighborhood, which means when you take away a land base from anybody, right, you're destroying something about their culture, making their culture very difficult, their community connections very difficult. So you get a sense of this scene that Mark was growing up in. Right. And of course, we find out, his relationship to Prince. Probably one of my favorite scenes in the book is when he auditions for Prince. And of course, like any family relationship, when you're really close to people, sometimes you love each other and sometimes you hate each other. Right. It's not all smooth sailing. And I think sometimes, some of the books that have come out, it's hard for some Prince fans. To hear anything bad about Prince. Yeah. To me, the whole person, the whole picture, I'm for all that stuff. I don't think it means you have to think less of somebody, just because they might disappoint you once in a while. That we're all humans. We all make mistakes. We all disappoint somebody. So I like that aspect of it, that Mark was willing to just be honest with himself. And others about what it was like to work with Prince, and obviously so many great things. And also, Prince was a tough person to work for at times. It seems.
Yeah,
it's a good story. It's a good story, and I think the other thing about it right now is, after what happened in Minneapolis this spring with the George Floyd killing, it does put Mark's stories about the racism that he experienced growing up in Minneapolis. It does put that into a different light, as the world has seen now, or had access to the story of racism in Minneapolis. Minneapolis is also a great place, and I've known many amazing people there from, all colors, all different ethnicities and backgrounds and religions. But there is also a strain of white supremacy that runs through Minneapolis, just like it does everywhere else. And I think reading his book now, in our new context, shed some light on that legacy of racism in Minneapolis. It's all the things, I don't believe in the binaries too much. It's not like I think Minneapolis is racist or not racist. All the things are there.
Right. Well, it's part of our national fabric, and it's unaddressed. Racism is still basically unaddressed and inadequately addressed. And, that's another great aspect. Thanks for bringing that up, that people may look into. Brown Mark sharing his voice, his experience. And it was very, very difficult to read. And, some of the experiences, but, other people have shared their experiences with Prince, and just the passion and love. I know purple people will they have their own reaction. They don't want to hear anything questionable about Prince, but it's like, this is part of life. I had my mother share with me. I come across some of the FBI and CIA files of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and he's a human being, and some of the affairs in his life were things that are less than Jesus-like, I'll say, less than perfect. Yeah. And I expressed that to my mom, how disappointed I was, and she said, Salvador, that's my middle name. Only my family calls me that, but she said, Salvador, he's just a man,
Yeah.
He's just a man. I know. Look at him like Prince fans look at him, and he is a rock god to human beings, but he's still beneath perfection. as perfectly imperfect as he is, and we love him. And same with Brown Mark. You know, these are all people part of a cluster of beauty. And so
Oh,
we
yeah.
can see with him sharing his voice, thank you for helping him reclaim his voice. But again, this is the excitement of when people get a chance to read, you know, my life in the purple kingdom, my life in the purple kingdom. So
It has a lot of heart. It really does. It's a heartfelt story.
well, I really, again, thank you for joining me today on Beyond the Box. Before you go, I wanted to just say, you know, we went through so many different subject matter,
Hmm.
and I like to close with any advice, any words of wisdom you have, any mentoring, you know, advisory on for our young people and for people who are advancing into the future. You know, what are your words that you'd like to end with today, Professor Hoover?
Well, I think one of the most important things right now is empathy. That there's a lot of historical forces pressing down on us right now that encourage us to hate others and not listen and not care. And um, uh, I feel like right now, empathy and critical thinking are, to my mind, just the most important things that we could have to salvage the good things out of this country, and hopefully escape
Mm,
some of the legacies of violence that are starting to reemerge. Empathy and critical thinking. That's what I would say.
thank you, Professor Hoover. Thank you so much. Again, everybody, Google our beautiful Professor Carmen Hoover and her work, and join her classes if you're in the Puget Sound area of Washington. Come on down, and I don't know which school you might see her at either of the three colleges she teaches at. So just visit her, and again, thank you again for your time. And I know you're busy. I know you're teaching, and so thank you again.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to visit with you.